Dr. Glenn.
Yes, sir.
Are you ready for our dating tips? Actually, it's not dating tips. It's communication and body language tips for first dates.
Yes and no, because part of me is going to cringe when I think about all of my first dates. But yes, I'm ready to pass all this information on.
Oh, I'm so excited for this topic. Now, for you, this is over a decade ago, right? Your last first date was over a decade ago.
Yeah, 12, 13 years ago.
Okay. For me, it was like within 5 years. So I'm a little more fresh.
You
but
are
still
fresh.
a bit rusty. I got some ring rust.
So you're an expert. So at this point, you're an expert. You know what's up, right?
Not at all. But I did use I studied a lot of body language and a lot of these communication tips, and I found them incredibly effective when it came to dating. I actually put the brunt of the research for this episode onto you because I feel kind of like a broken record. I've talked a lot about the same things. I wanted to see what you came up with, and you have a great list for us. So we have 5 different areas. We have tons of tips within. We're going to get straight into this. We might as well start with an intro, yeah?
Let's do it.
Okay. Welcome to 12-Week Relationships. This is your place for better relationships in weeks, not years. And what we mean by relationships is all of them, starting with the relationship with yourself, working out to friends, to family, to your romances. Well, if you're married, romance, just one. Unless, you can,
Yeah. Polyamorous, right?
Yeah, you can go that.
Yeah. It's all good.
We're going to have to work a different framework, though, when it comes to that kind of... I don't know if our framework still applies in this. Anyway.
Maybe we'll add weeks to that or something.
That's what we mean by relationships. All of them. We created this platform because human connection is such a huge part of our daily lives, regardless of what we're doing. And we're here to give insights on human connection.
Absolutely.
Okay, so jumping into body language and communication tips, the very first thing that we have here, the first one that you wrote was starting with positive energy. And I'm going to say, Glenn, how the hell do you just start with positive energy?
Well, drink lots of coffee. Take a pot of it. That's number one.
We're starting with positive energy today.
But Amy Cuddy talked about the Superman or Superwoman pose. So before a job interview or doing something important, you stand up and you do this pose, and basically it exudes confidence and it makes you have this higher confidence, higher energy state before you engage on that date.
I remember reading that, actually. That was in Presence, Amy Cuddy's book, Presence. Mm-hmm. But a lot of our listeners are just listening, and a lot of them are actually on YouTube watching. So I kind of feel like you need to demonstrate this.
Okay, I'm going to have to suck in my gut then. But I'm going to do it.
Suck away, bro.
I'm going to do it, man.
Do it. All right. So you're saying just standing and holding a posture is scientifically proven.
Correct.
To actually increase energy and kind of positive vibes.
Yeah, so hands on the hips, looking up, and then basically just holding this pose.
Okay, so for those that are just listening, Glenn is literally doing the Superman pose or the Beyonce pose, hands on the hips,
Beyonce.
Beyonce has got this down. Legs are kind of shoulder width apart, toes out, and his chin is, I don't know why he's looking up at the ceiling,
because
but
you have to put your head out.
Oh, you do have to, okay.
You put your head out.
You know what, to our listeners, I'm gonna have to apologize because I feel like we can all use a little bit more positive vibes, and I'm gonna take part in this demonstration as well. Okay. Hold on. There's a little cable.
Put your feet apart. See, feet apart, shoulder width apart. Look up, chest out. All right. Do you feel it?
I actually do.
Yeah, right?
I don't know. Okay. I don't know if that's in my head. Is it? No, I know it's not in my head only because of the research around this topic, because there are many instances where we can see studies and research showing that basically changing your body language, just simple shifts, right?
Mm-hmm.
Shifting forward, kind of leaning into a conversation, that stuff has a very real impact on the physiology, the way that you are feeling the moment. I don't understand it, but the science backs it up. So yeah, I did feel it.
Yeah, right. Because you're putting your chest out, it's positive energy, and you're changing your neural networks.
That's so weird, though.
Right?
that has to be part of our 50,000-year-old software that is doing that. Why would we feel? But yeah, when we hold that pose, I do feel more energized.
Yeah, and I actually do it before lectures because I was really nervous when I first started lecturing, especially in front of a bigger audience. So then I would want to slouch because I'm afraid, right? Because I don't want to not do well. So later, I started putting my hands on my hips and just started looking out at the crowd, and it started changing my physiology.
Mm.
Yeah, so it really does work.
That's very interesting. Okay, so before the first date, we can kind of like, hold this pose. And I'm imagining maybe that's why my first date with Yen went so well, because when she showed up, I was standing outside with my hands on my hips, namely because she was late, 15 minutes late to our lunch date.
So you had the cape on. You
But yeah,
had
I felt
hands on the
incredibly
hips.
confident
Yeah.
and angry. No, um, I'm just kidding. I didn't use this tip, but along these lines, so that's a great one when it comes to just before the date to kind of like hold this pose, ideally in a place where people aren't going to look at you funny. One of the other things that I found very helpful in any of these first impression kind of scenarios is maintaining sort of an active forward body language. Not forward in the sense of like coming onto you, but forward in the sense of like leaning into things. Correct. So in a conversation, if I'm just getting to know somebody, I don't really want to be leaning back against something. I feel like it reduces my energy versus leaning forward. I can feel like I'm engaging and more present with them.
Correct. So you want to engage in language that's open. So when you're leaning forward like that, it shows interest.
Yeah.
And then it makes me want to lean forward and show interest as well.
Yeah. So kind of maintaining that. And as soon as I lean back, I do this with, we lean back. I do this when I'm more comfortable with the relationship, right? I want it to be more chill, more casual. But when it's a first impression, I want them to know I'm interested. I want them to know I'm engaged. And so I'm going to make sure I'm kind of leaning forward. When I'm standing, I'm going to make sure that, my attention is directed towards them, all that stuff. And we have a lot more, of this, but just the basics. We're just scratching the surface.
Yeah, just show interest. Don't act like you're not interested.
But a lot of people don't know how to show interest. You know what I mean? Like, I would say that when I was first dating, and I'm talking like going back to early high school, college, I didn't know how to show interest other than just talking.
No, that is true. I mean, if you're not aware of your own body language and what you're doing, you're just going to be like, okay, like I'm just being normal. And then I think especially now with like the technological age, especially younger kids or people that are younger, they have this facial expression where they look like they're talking to a computer screen. So I think it's really learning to up the body language game, eye contact, acting like a person's there instead of a computer, and really being present.
Yeah, if I come into a space and somebody introduces themselves and immediately kind of sits back, does basically this, like this very relaxed kind of pose, honestly, it's a bit of a turnoff. Not turn off like romantically. I mean, like turn off in terms of like, I just don't know that I am that interested anymore in the conversation. I feel like they're not there and they're not going to engage. So why should I, type thing.
Well, also like it reflects like you need to go forward and overreach to reach them. Right. So that body language is saying like, I'm going to pull away from you. So you need to come towards me.
Exactly.
Versus like, let's have a mutuality and let's kind of sort of meet in the middle.
And I'm kind of like a cocky SOB. Like you lean back from me. I'm like, I ain't going forward. I'm too good to go forward.
All right, Superman.
I'll meet you in the middle. We won't meet at all.
There you go. Hands on the hip while you're doing that, right?
Amen. Amen. And with that, we are done.
Done. This is over.
Okay. One of the other things that I found interesting from your research actually was raising the eyebrows when first meeting.
Yeah. So they've done studies, especially when you do job interviews. And then if you like, if I go to you, Pye, just make a flat expression. I'm like, hey, Pye, how's it going? You just kind of look at me, right? But if you softly raise your eyebrows and you go, hey, Pye, how's it going? Your eyebrows raise too, right? So it causes this kind of natural reaction to want to react to me back.
That's such an interesting thing. When you do it, I can actually feel my eyebrows moving.
Yeah, right.
Like oh.
Yeah, it's like, oh, hey, how's it going?
And it's like a gentle one, right? Like you're not like.
It's not a psychotic stare. Like I'm gonna kill you. Like
you're not. You're not like. Just for those listening, my eyes are like literally popping wide open.
Like a hard stare.
My eyebrows are touching the top of my hairline right now.
Yeah. Really nice to meet you. You don't want to scare the person, but nice and soft, a subtle raise of the eyebrows while you're greeting that person.
It's funny because so many of these body language and communication tips are specific to cultures, right? Because in each culture around the world is going to have like their own sets of rules. And I have met quite a few people who do the super surprised eyebrow raise when they meet you. And it's usually like my Japanese and Korean friends, like when they first meet, it's like this over exaggerated, like,
Yeah.
hey, like,
Yeah.
and you're like, whoa, nice.
There's a lot of enthusiasm in culture. No, that is true.
Right?
No.
And all of these rules, they change depending on where you're at. So I guess we should probably preface this by saying, you know, we live in the United States and
Yeah, factor in culture for sure.
yeah, a lot of our tips might be more North America centric.
No, that is true. Because when I went to Korea, then they were very excited. Oh my god! And then,
Yeah.
and then I'm just like, hey, what's up, man? Like it
And
kind
they're
of
probably like,
it doesn't match. It
Glen
doesn't.
guy's a dick.
This guy's a jerk. Right? So definitely match the culture for sure.
Okay. The other piece of this, so you know, when you are first interacting, we have the raise of the eyebrows, and then we have the extending of the hand. We go to forearm length, right, to go for the handshake.
Yeah, because if you go like this, it's too far,
Mm-hmm.
and then if you go like this, it's too close. Where
Yeah.
like we're gonna be like nose to nose,
Like
right?
T-Rex arms.
Yeah, exactly.
Like a T-Rex handshake.
Exactly.
Bring it in right here.
Exactly. It's gonna be way too close, right?
Yeah.
So a forearm is a perfect distance where you just kind of almost do the 90
Yeah.
degree,
Just like a nice bend in the
Yeah.
hand, bend in the elbow, you know,
shake
like,
the hand, or if you're like, hey, can I give you a hug at that distance? It's less threatening.
yeah, there's certain things that are, and what's funny was after the pandemic, you know, we'd all had kind of receded into our little circles. And then once we started being more social again, I felt like a lot of this body language wasn't, I don't know, it felt awkward. I found myself like when meeting somebody, I'd be 10 feet away and I'm like, nice to meet you. And I'm like, whoa, we got a lot of distance to close before I can actually shake your hand. And so I was doing like some things that were kind of awkward when it came to that. But again, the handshake in and of itself is kind of a Western, North American Western kind of thing because, you know, Persians, for example, we would typically go in for like a handshake and kiss. So you'd do kisses on the cheeks. It's a French thing too, right? Or it might even be like a hug with a, you know, kiss on the cheeks and stuff like that. Americans screw this up a lot by going for the lips, and you're not supposed to do that.
No. Hands on the hips, but no lips.
No.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, you go for that's always a weird one. When I do this, like every now and then I would bring, you know, one of my younger friends into, and I'm not super Persian by any means. I'm Iranian, not so much Persian, but I do have family that is. And so when I would introduce kind of my Western friends to that, every now and then one of them would try to kiss someone on the lips when they go for the hug. You're like, nope, you're not supposed to do. No, you're supposed to turn the face more. Turn that face.
That's when that psychotic stare comes in, right?
Yeah.
You're like, oh, what are you doing, right? Yeah. It's not nice to meet you.
Okay, so raise the eyebrows,
Slightly.
forearm slightly,
Soft gaze.
soft gaze, forearm length handshake. We also had in here, don't do the stare,
Yeah.
like the psycho
hard
stare, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And then I guess going toward the next piece was using open body language. So in a first impression, we generally want to use open body language. Maybe you can give an example and talk through what that is.
So like putting your hands on your thighs, right? Because it shows like an openness versus like crossing your arms, right? Because usually when you're crossing your arms, you're examining something. You're trying to gather, you're trying to think about or process something. It's not really conversation.
So let me demonstrate this. So you're saying like, I need to do this. And maybe you can describe for all the listeners what I'm doing.
So he's standing up right now.
So instead of this,
He's crossing his arms. You look like a bodyguard right now.
yeah, you want me to do this.
Yeah, or just hands on the thighs, right?
Accentuate the hips towards.
Are you combining everything we're doing? The
Yes.
Superman pose plus the open body language.
I was pushing my pelvis toward Glen right now.
And like in a yeah, it was kind
And
of
using the hands to kind of accentuate and point to the pelvis. Is that what I should do?
yes, I guess so.
No, Dr. Glen, you are not supposed to say yes.
I'm totally thrown off right now.
I have successfully made an impression.
You have made an impression.
Probably not the right impression. Okay, but open body language is basically, it's in various forms, right? So we would expect the chest to actually be facing the other person's chest. We expect the legs to kind of be, you wrote open legs.
Not like that. Yeah, not like that.
Maybe not. But if we're going to cross our legs, we're kind of like crossing into a person.
Yeah, toward them to show interest.
Yeah.
Right.
And
Hands
generally
down.
it's easy to see when someone's not interested because they're kind of like turned away. Like
Right. There's an uncomfortableness.
Yeah, and they would,
Yeah.
if you're at a bar, or if you're at some place where you kind of go and approach somebody, initially, oftentimes it's this body language at the beginning, and you're kind of off to the side. And I'm like, hey,
Yeah.
nice to meet you. And then once I figure out that I want to be engaged in this conversation, you'll see the person noticeably shift. They'll kind of turn and bring the chest in, and now you have their attention essentially, right?
Yeah, and I think it's important to have like boundaries. So like when you're trying to move in, you don't want to overstep to their space. You want to see if they're going to meet you somewhere toward the middle.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if someone has closed body language, how can we open them up?
So you can like we do this in therapy a lot where you state the obvious. So for example, like a lot of times like in therapy, they'll have their arms closed and they're like, I get that you don't want to be here. And that you're probably forced to be here because a family member wants you to be here, but let's try to make the most of this. What can you get out of this, right? And then that starts to open them up. So similarly on a date,
I would say, I get that you don't want to be here. But
I get that you don't like me and my psychotic stare, damn it.
I get that you don't want to be here, but if you can just grin and bear it for the next 30 minutes, that'd be great.
I did the Superman pose. I pelvic thrusted you in the face, but what's the problem, right? But no, you could just kind of be like, look, it's really exciting to meet people, but it's also like really awkward at the first time doing this. So I'm sure this is kind of new, but how do you cope with that? How do you deal with meeting new people? So it just kind of breaks the ice. You state the obvious, and then it starts to open them up a little bit.
Yeah, there's an interesting thing that happens whenever you state the obvious. Immediately, it makes the other person kind of at ease because So one of the easy things when, like for example, if you're going to go up and take somebody's picture on the street and it's somebody that you don't know, right? You might go up to them and say, I know this is awkward, but would you mind if I took your picture? I'm out here doing street portraits. It's weird that I'm asking, but it would be fun. Just the fact that like I'm calling attention to it puts them at ease, right? Instead of saying, hey, is it cool if I take your picture? Because then they go, well, that's kind of weird. And they're not recognizing that's weird. Is this person socially weird? Are they, a psychopath? What are they? But in a first date setting, to simply say, man, first dates are fun, right? It's kind of like there's tension though. Like how do you get past that? And as soon as you bring that to attention and kind of state the obvious, then there's that easing effect.
Well, it also builds rapport. Like it's a natural rapport thing where there's a commonality. Like, yeah, this is awkward, and thanks for bringing it up. So it brings an automatic connection at that point.
Yeah. Well, if you're socially aware and I'm socially aware and I'm calling attention to it, it shows that, hey, I'm with you. I'm on the same wavelength.
And also it builds a sense of trust immediately because it shows a sense of honesty, and you're bringing that into this date.
Okay. So some signs, positive signs of open body language, they would go back to the legs kind of pointing towards, the chest going towards, the pelvis going toward.
Yes.
Legs not being like closed off from somebody, not doing the
arms closed
and
distancing
folded,
yourself, pulling away,
leaning forward and into somebody.
Correct.
All of these are great examples of open and welcoming body language.
Not interrupting. Other things is like in terms of the conversation, they're wanting to continue the conversation. Like there's not these dead silences so often. Like they're pushing it forward because they want to remain engaged with you.
Well, that was the next piece. So the next piece is conversation itself. So what kind of, when it comes to first date conversations, what are the rules, the tips, the guides?
Just share everything about your life and
Let's go back to the onion, Glenn.
Oh yeah, we got to peel the layers.
Yeah.
Peel the layers.
No, you got too much funk in those layers. I need you to go one at a time. Let's not cut to the core.
Exactly. I was just kidding. I was just kidding, right? Don't cut the knife, right? Don't cut it. Don't cut it. Just slowly peel there. You don't want to go too deep on a first date. You're just meeting this person.
Yeah, that's another sign of, one easy sign of having emotional maturity and being in a good and healthy place is that you don't overshare when you're first getting to know somebody. Like you kind of understand the concept of boundaries, and that trust and sharing and secrets and experiences and all these different things, they're earned. This is something that happens with time. It's not instantaneous. So when someone, whether it's a first date, whether it's a first impression, when someone comes to me and they just start dropping their life story, I'm immediately like, okay, there's a problem here. There's something going on with the way that they're thinking, the way that they're processing, and I don't want this relationship.
Well, it's also showing them that they're just not in a space to really date, right? Like they're just coming as a wound, and they just want someone to listen to them to process all of their pain.
Yeah.
That is not going on a date.
Yeah. It signals a lot of weird things, right? Because if you're willing to share those things with a stranger, then in my mind, what else are you willing to do? Are you, going to sleep with someone on your first date? That's someone that you don't, and not to say that there's anything necessarily wrong with any one of these particular things, but it sends me down this pathway. Like, are you going to get too intimate with everybody too quickly? Not just physically, but also intellectually and emotionally. Why don't you have somebody that you're sharing these things with? Like, don't you have close friends that you can share this kind of stuff with versus a stranger? So it makes me question, do you have other relationships that are close? What do those look like?
No, it brings up a lot of red flags that you just brought up. Like, what are your relationship styles, and why are you dumping all of this on me?
Mm-hmm.
And then even at its best, right? Let's say like you share everything and the other person shares everything. Maybe there's an outlier where like you guys are just meant to be, but that's not so common. It usually ends up being like both people feel embarrassed and they share too much, and it didn't take its course. So on the first date, it went to this place which should have been like 2 or 3 months later, and it just crashes.
Mm-hmm.
Like it just ends up not happening after that.
Yeah, I'm thinking back to, here's the thing is that a lot of us don't necessarily like small talk, right? I'm not a huge fan of small talk. I actually like to talk about stuff that's meaningful, and I don't want to talk about weather or traffic or any stupid kind of thing. So when I get to know somebody, I do want to talk about meaningful things, and it can be tricky of knowing what is meaningful but not too deep. And so when I first met Yen on our first date, I went through, I think, probably 50 to 100 first dates before Yen. A lot of them were just phone dates. Like I had a process. We'll save the process for later, but I had a full on system of getting through thousands of potential leads, date leads. Okay. Anyway.
You are the man.
No.
There you go. This is another podcast topic.
I make frameworks, right? Including when it came to dating, I made a framework for that too. So when I actually did meet Yen in person, we did both kind of want to get into why we're here and the things that are meaningful to us. But when she would ask me questions like, why are you divorced? That's a deep one, right? Mm-hmm. And I do want to share, but I don't want to share everything. So I drew a line at kind of saying, yeah, I mean, you'll probably figure this out over time, but it's difficult loving somebody when they don't love themselves, when they don't know who they are, and those kind of things. I don't think my ex is a bad person, and I do my best not to, speak bad about her, especially in front of my children. But I don't think she knows who she is, and when that's the case, it's really difficult to be in a relationship with that person. So to me, that was sharing, but not going so deep as to like the nuances.
Well, the other thing is, besides the good boundaries, it's saying that to share that kind of information, that trust needs to be earned.
Correct.
And at that stage of that relationship, it hasn't been earned yet.
Correct.
And I think this in general, like when I look at my dating history, which is kind of pathetic, right? But I could look back if I'm oversharing on a date, it's usually in relation to the feeling of desperation that I feel. Like I'm trying to find that home run or the one, right? So it shows your mental state in terms of where you are in the dating process.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're in a healthier state, boundaries are important and that it needs time to build. So I think the more you overshare, if a person's oversharing, the more you're in a desperate state. And that's an indicator. And if you're dating someone and you're on a date and they're oversharing, like you really need to set boundaries with that person.
Yeah, it says a lot in a lot of those phone dates, right, that I had. And I did this process, by the way, Glenn, because I quickly realized when I was dating that there was a million things that I would rather do than be on a date with a person that I really didn't like. Yeah. I'd rather spend time with my children. I'd rather spend time on my business. I'd rather just sit by myself reading versus spending time having dinner with someone I'm not a fan of.
That's the worst, is having dinner with someone you don't want to be with. It's just the time goes so slow.
Totally.
Yeah.
And so I made this process of like, okay, we're going to begin with, I was online dating. This was on not Tinder. I found Tinder to be not so effective in finding quality. Maybe that's just my own stereotype, but this was on Bumble. Bumble I had the best luck with. So I also tried like Coffee Meets Bagel. That was a weird one. I met a lot of weird people on there.
Do you meet for breakfast on that one?
No, it's the same. Like you just kind of open up conversations and then, kind of go from there. But I don't know why it's called Coffee Meets Bagel. Anyway, I would start with messaging. If that goes well, I would say, let's text. If they can, carry a conversation, it goes well, then I would say, let's get to a phone call. And if that goes well, then we'd do a quick kind of coffee, like just 15-minute bookended with meetings. So that way I would always have a reason to kind of get out. Anyway, I had this whole process of like, how can I most effectively get to know somebody? So a lot of these phone conversations went straight to people oversharing or venting, like about an ex. And that was the worst. I was like, in each of these instances, I would say, sounds like, that's something that you're still working through. And they'd be like, yeah, I just can't believe that he did this, Oh, I get it. Yeah. Cool. Well, at some point, like, hit me up in the future. And it was great chatting with you. And then I would just end the call because they're not in the place. Like they're not in the same emotional place that I am. And it's very easy to see.
And that's a dynamic between being healthy and unhealthy when you're dating and being self-aware. You're self-aware and you're able to make good decisions and say, look, I'm not going to engage here with you because I don't want to go there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that person that's oversharing, they're in a kind of painful, desperate state that they need to work on themselves.
Yeah. Okay. So do not overshare. Yeah. The feeling that comes after oversharing is an interesting one because you generally feel
embarrassed.
Kind of embarrassed.
There's a level of embarrassment. And then even in therapy, the rule of thumb is you never have the client share too much because if they do, it feels good at the time, but then they're not going to come back because they're going to be too embarrassed to talk to you the week after that. So dating is the same. You share way too much, it gets really awkward really, really quick.
That was an interesting one that you shared with me that I didn't know to begin with. And I don't know that I believed until you actually showed me. But yeah, in a therapy session, you're in the first meeting, you're not supposed to go that deep into it.
You don't go even the first couple of sessions. Like you just want to do an assessment. You want to get to know them and then you redirect them back because you're doing it because it's appropriate. Boundaries are being set. We're going to get in the middle stage of treatment. We're going to get into the heart of all of your problems, but you do that before and it goes to shit. And this is from experience. Like when I was an intern, I'd watched a lot of like those Dr. Phil shows and then it's like 15 minutes. We're going to solve this in 15 minutes. Right. So I see them and then I was just like jumping right in and I'd be like, man, this was the best session ever. And then they wouldn't come back.
Yeah.
And it was learning because my boundaries are off. Like I had to do the assessment, build the trust, build the rapport, and then go into that space.
Yeah. That was such an interesting thing that I learned from you. And I learned it kind of the hard way because I had designed like an initial consult in kind of a way where we get to a deep emotional place, and you had brought that up as an issue, and as I thought back to the I think I did 4 or 5 consults with just people that were considering, and I realized that in each one we went too deep, and in each one they stopped coming because you get to that place of embarrassment too fast. Like you're not supposed to share that much that quickly. It was weird because I thought that the therapist to client dynamic was different, but it's not. It's again a dynamic where you still want to peel back the onion one layer at a time.
No, the whole concept that we're saying is all relationships are the same. So even the therapist client dynamic, that's supposed to mimic what you do out in the real world. So that is like a real relationship as well.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to say, in addition to the conversational aspect, or just kind of adding into this piece, would be to stay present. And staying present to me means that you get rid of any distractions. Phone, this goes back to there's a lot of beautiful tips and techniques in The Charisma Myth. This is a book by Olivia Fox Cabane. And one of them is simply just, her whole thing is basically how to stay present, throughout life, throughout relationships, throughout conversations. But there's really easy things that we can do to help with that. One is just leave the phone in your bag, leave it in your pocket, leave it somewhere else, mute it, do not disturb, and don't pick it up. Like don't set it on the table so it pops on every time you get a text or something like that. Immediately, as soon as that happens, if I'm the other person, and having it happen to me, I'm kind of like, look, my time is valuable. Your time should be valuable too. But if you can't respect that my time is valuable, then we immediately have a problem. Because I'm
No,
not doing this to you.
no, I agree. And then, it just shows a level of respect that you're at this time, in this present moment, this dynamic is the most important thing to me right now.
Yeah.
Getting to know you is very important to me. There's no other thing that I'd rather do right now.
And how crappy is it when you're having a great conversation and you're right there, and then all of a sudden their phone lights up and you're in the middle of saying something and they go like this.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of disrespectful.
Mm-hmm.
But let me ask you this. How much of this is a generational thing though?
Oh, I think it's getting a lot worse.
Because like, when I like in the classroom setting, because they're like between 18 and 24, 25, and I'm like, let's do a group activity. And then they break up into groups. So I'm used to the generation where like people would share and they talk to each other.
Mm-hmm.
They don't talk to each other at all. Like they're sitting together, but they're texting, even like through the computer. There's hardly anything spoken when they're doing group projects.
True.
So that part is a difference. So there might be like an age component to this as well, but I'm not really sure. Well, I mean, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I would 1000% agree with you that there is an age component as well. And the problem though to me is that age component, I do think that the younger generations, if you're 20, if you're 25, 30, and our children, they're going to struggle with this even more. But it doesn't change the fact that it's killing your charisma. It's killing your ability to stay present and to engage with somebody. So whether it's more difficult for you to kind of learn because this is the kind of way that you grew up, it doesn't matter. In a one-on-one conversation or in a dating type environment, it's destroying your ability to kind of attract somebody or to engage, to keep them, present.
Yeah, and I think bottom line is human connection is timeless,
For sure.
right? So regardless of the technological advances, learning to build connections with other people it never goes out of style.
Yeah.
And it's important to prioritize that no matter what.
Yeah. And you can see like, how often do you go to a restaurant? Well, we don't often go to restaurants anymore, but in the past, like, and even now, you go to a restaurant and how often do you see two younger people who are having dinner, both of them just texting on their phones?
Yeah, that's a weird one to me. Like I see it a lot on campus, people hanging out. Like that kind of takes me aback. Like I'm just not used to that still.
Yeah, you don't. I even if you have already let's say that you're past the first date, right? You're in a relationship. Doesn't matter. Maybe you've dated for a few years, or maybe you're married, or whatever it is. You're not connecting. I don't know why you're there with another person when both of you are on your phone. You're not connecting. This is not quality time. You're not doing anything other than just simply kind of just growing apart.
But maybe it's showing our age because, I was talking to some of the students and they're like, we are connecting though. We're just doing it through our phones. But to them, that is connection. And then talking on the phone is a big deal. Like, ooh, that's too much. Like, that's too real, right? Versus like just keeping it at a text.
So getting together physically, but then texting.
Texting is like, it's still a big deal. Like that took me some time to process. I'm like, okay. Like, because I would literally like, are you guys doing the assignment? And they're like, oh yeah. And then they would show that they're doing everything through the computer, but they're assigning things and they're communicating.
But they're physically present.
But they're physically not talking to each other. So that's where I was like, man, I guess I'm old.
We are old.
I
mean, but I don't know that we have enough research or data on this yet to be able to say like, can you effectively connect with somebody by sitting together and texting? But my gut, from everything that we understand about human psychology, that seems to me an automatically diminished form of engagement and communication.
Yeah, it's definitely becoming more of a lost art for sure. And it still needs to exist and be developed, especially for the younger generations.
Yeah, I'm just wondering like if that's the norm for you, if that becomes the way that you communicate, how do you get to topics that are more in depth? We said to kind of peel back the onion, right? Slowly. But how do you do that when you struggle to like engage and stay present?
That's a hard one. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, eventually, my guess, like I said, when I look at the younger generation, like once you commit to a relationship, you have to speak to each other.
Mm-hmm.
You have to look at each other and communicate physically to each other. So I guess that's like maybe the ultimate goal. I mean,
The ultimate goal is
yeah,
to
like
eventually
everything is computer technological. Like it's that safe boundary until it's time to actually like physically be in front of each other. You know, I mean, I don't know.
Interesting.
Yeah, but I'm just saying like human connection is important, but there's definitely like age gaps and cultural components involved.
It'll be fascinating to see how this evolves over the next 20, 30 years and what studies come up with in terms of effective means of connection and how does technology play into this. Because maybe in 20 years, if we go this metaverse route, in 20 years, I don't know that like in-person, like first date body language and communication tips, how much is it going to matter when your
No, you're
first
right.
date is in the metaverse?
You're right. It might not matter at all. But on the flip side too, like among the younger generation, depression and anxiety is going up. So I think part of that is the loss of the ability to connect more on a human level.
Oh, 1000%.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is it's just that the way that everything is moving, even just in social media itself, right? The way that technology is pushing us, it's going to a place very quickly. And while it's going there, it's causing all of these psychological problems, issues in self-worth, self-confidence, all these different things. But technology is not stopping. So it seems like it's just going to get worse and worse until there's an eventual pushback. But I don't know when that's going to happen.
Battlestar Galactica, man. They're going to take over.
We deviated a little bit from
I know. Sorry. Anyway.
Battlestar Galactica.
Let's go back.
That was our last note before we get back on topic.
Let's go back. Anytime
we reach Battlestar Galactica, that's our marker for like,
sorry,
we have derailed.
I apologize. That's my fault.
Okay. One of the last pieces that we were going to talk about was just basically for longer dates to have two locations. Now, why did you have this?
Yeah. So some of the studies that I was looking at, they found that if you go to like, coffee first and then you can have dinner, the fact that you guys are going from two different places, it actually breeds a level of excitement, a level of trust and attraction. So actually, like you have a better chance of getting a second date if you move to 2 or 3 locations on that first date.
This is interesting.
Because if you think about it, like, imagine like when you were dating, you meet at one place, then you go to a second place. It's more memorable for the fact that you guys were moving around to these different locations together. It's going to stick more.
I guess I have a different philosophy on dating, especially, well, I want to think, okay, I'm going to say I definitely have a different philosophy on dating because, it's probably not one that's like universal or common, but I think dating in your 30s, I was 35 when I was dating again, right? 35, 36 with 2 kids. And I think that form of dating is very different than, high school and college dating in like your 20s. Because in your 20s, it's kind of fun to make these dates events, like, and you go and do, a couple different things and that's cool. But I guess when I'm in my 30s and I was dating, it was like, going back to what I said earlier, I didn't want to spend time with people that I didn't really like. So my approach to dating in my 30s was, how can I most effectively figure out if this person's even worth going to lunch with?
But then, like, for example, you mentioned the coffee example, right? So you'd have coffee first.
Mm-hmm.
And then if it was going well, then you probably would get dinner after that.
No.
No?
I would save dinner for another.
Oh, so you
lunch or
you just
for,
space it out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. But it's kind of the same philosophy. It's just your approach is just longer versus like, okay, look, we have coffee. We figure out if this is worth doing or not. And then if it is, then have dinner. That's just a second location, right? Mm-hmm. Now you're having dinner, talking it out. You're just doing it all in one date versus kind of spacing it out.
I guess that could potentially also give you the opportunity to get out, right? If you are going for just coffee first, but then they might have kind of similar plans where it's like, I've made other plans. There's no time for lunch or dinner afterwards. But if there were potentially like 2 different locations, then as long as the other person didn't know about it, you could say like, oh, I have to run after coffee and that kind of thing. Or if you finish coffee, you could say, hey, what about, we go grab a bite at this point.
Yeah, but I think that's why the 2 location is important because usually if it ends on the first date, if it ends after coffee or drinks or whatever, it usually means this isn't going to happen.
Okay, but we need another episode on the ideal first date, because I think my approach to this is going to very much differ from the typical. My thought on the very first time that you get together, do something. See, anybody can have fun. You can make any crazy activity memorable, right? You go skydiving, it's going to be memorable. You go to, bar hopping, it's going to be memorable. You go and we're going to go and try 15 different types of food. It's going to be memorable. Any extravagant date night for your first date is going to be memorable. So my thought is take the extravagance of the activity away.
Absolutely.
And do something that's mundane.
I agree.
And if you can do that thing that's mundane and have a good time doing it, then
I agree. I think coffee and dinner doesn't mean like some extravagant dinner. It just means some mundane place to go eat.
Yeah, well, I was going to share my... See, I scaled it back from that even.
Did you go to like McDonald's or something?
I guess the very first time that Yen and I met was... she had... I'll share this later, but we had met for lunch. That was the first time that we did it in person. And it went great. And the next date, I just said, why don't you come over and do meal prep with me? I think she told me later, she's like, I thought you were just trying to hook up with me. I was like, no. She's like, I thought you were a player. Why? Because you wrote entrepreneur in your dating profile. I was like, but I am though.
That sounds like a player though. Like, hey, I'm an entrepreneur.
What is it? Okay, so
why don't you meal prep with me, girl? Like that is kind of playerish. I mean,
I am the least player of anybody. But anyway, this was her impression. So I invited her over meal prep, and she showed up, and we're literally doing like meal prep. and we had a blast. And she asked, why are we doing meal prep? And I'm like, because if we can have fun doing this, something that we do, this is something I do every week. Like I'm cooking for 2-3 hours every single week to make all my food. If we can have fun doing this, then we'll have fun doing anything, right?
Oh, that's a really good sign. I think like, things that are important to you, the everyday components of life, figuring out if this is going to work or not. I completely agree with you on that. But I think on the first date and first impressions, I still believe that a couple locations is still really helpful.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm still sticking to that. And then like what I'm hearing from you is that there might be like an age kind of difference. But if you're 80 years old and you have a bad hip, and then you're like willing to take that cane and go to a second location with me, that's a good sign that this is moving.
That's even more so the case for meal prep.
You know what I'm saying?
If you're 80 years old and have a bad hip, we ain't needing no 2 locations.
I'm just saying, man.
All right. Well, on that note,
yes,
80 years old with a bad hip.
Yeah.
I do want to come back and battle out this what should you do for your first date conversation, though. I think that's a good one.
We'll continue this, yeah, for sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you guys for joining us on this episode. We hope you enjoyed. If you have enjoyed the podcast, you can help us out by jumping over to iTunes and in the Apple iTunes store. Is it a store? I don't know. But you can find the 12-Week Relationships podcast. Leave us a review. Obviously, positive reviews help. Negative ones, not so much. So if you have something negative to say, DM us. That's what we're there for on Instagram. You can find us at 12-Week Relationships on Instagram, where you can send us any thoughts, critique. If you have questions, send us those too, because as we do on the podcast, we answer questions that the community presents. And that's it. Oh, and in the meantime, Dr. Glen's schedule is actually filling out quite a bit with clients, which is awesome. But if you guys want to book an appointment, if you guys want to actually see what Glen can do for you, for your relationships, jump on to 12weekrelationships.com. There's a free 15-minute consult that probably is going to go away in not too long, because we're actually going to have a wait list, most likely by early next year.
Yeah,
that we'll have to start working through. So
it's moving quick.
All right, guys, that's it for us. Hope you guys enjoyed, and we'll see you all next time. Peace.
Thank you so much.